She left for work on a Tuesday morning in January. She locked her door, she walked toward her car, and somewhere in that short distance between her front door and her black Chevy Malibu in the parking lot, 24-year-old Jennifer Joyce Kesse vanished. No scream, no witness, no trace, just gone. Her car was found 3 days later, parked at another apartment complex 1 mile away, and on surveillance video, investigators watched as an unidentified person drove her car into that parking lot, parked it calmly, and walked away. But they couldn't see the face. Not because the video quality was poor, not because the camera malfunctioned, but because of a fence, a simple wooden fence with gaps between the posts. And in every single frame, as the person walked past that camera, their face was perfectly, impossibly hidden behind those fence posts. It's one of the most frustrating pieces of evidence in modern true crime history. A perfect view of the person who knows what happened to Jennifer, and yet we can't see who they are. 20 years have passed. Jennifer Kesse has never been found. No body, no ransom, no confession. Just a figure walking behind a fence, and a family that has never stopped searching. But in October 2025, something changed. New DNA evidence, a narrowed suspect list, a case that is no longer cold. This is the story of Jennifer Joyce Kesse, and after 2 decades, we may finally be close to answers.
You're watching Hidden Chronicles, not just a channel, but a community driven by curiosity and the search for truth. If you believe every mystery deserves answers, you're in the right place. Subscribe to stay informed, share to spread awareness, and join the conversation below. Because together, we don't just watch the story, we uncover what's hidden.
Jennifer Joyce Kesse was born on May 20th, 1981 in New Jersey, but she grew up in Tampa, Florida, in a close, loving family. She was the daughter of Drew and Joyce Kesse, and she had a younger brother named Logan. From childhood, Jennifer was driven, ambitious, focused on building a successful life for herself. She was the kind of person who set goals and achieved them, who worked hard and took pride in her independence. She graduated from Vivian Gaither High School in Tampa, where she was known as a bright, responsible, and kind young woman. She wasn't just academically strong, she was socially engaged, had close friendships, and maintained deep connections with her family. Her parents would later say that Jennifer called or texted them every single day. They were a tight-knit family, the kind where everyone knew what everyone else was doing, where communication was constant and love was unconditional. After high school, Jennifer attended the University of Central Florida in Orlando, where she earned a degree in finance in 2003. She was intelligent, capable, and ready to launch her career. By 2005, she was working as a finance manager at Central Florida Investments, a timeshare company in Ocoee, just outside Orlando. She was good at her job. She had recently been promoted to project manager. Her colleagues respected her, her bosses valued her. She was building a career, and she was proud of it. In January 2006, Jennifer's life was exactly where she wanted it to be. She had just purchased her own condominium at Mosaic at Millenia, a gated community in Orlando. It was a major milestone for a 24-year-old woman, buying her own place, living independently, proving to herself and the world that she could make it on her own. The condo was in a complex that was still under construction, being converted from apartments to condominiums, which meant there were construction workers on site regularly. But the complex had a security gate, and Jennifer felt reasonably safe there. She was also in a loving relationship with her boyfriend, Rob Allen, who lived in Fort Lauderdale, about 3 hours south of Orlando. They had been together for a year, and though the long distance was sometimes challenging, they made it work. They saw each other every weekend. They talked on the phone every day. They were planning a future together. Jennifer's family and friends all agreed. She was happy. She was thriving. She had everything going for her. And then, on January 24th, 2006, all of that ended.
The weekend before Jennifer disappeared, she and Rob took a trip to St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It was supposed to be a romantic getaway, a chance to relax and enjoy each other's company, away from the stresses of work and the challenges of maintaining a long-distance relationship. They stayed at a resort, enjoyed the beaches, spent time together. By all accounts, it was a good trip. Rob would later tell investigators and journalists that Jennifer seemed happy during the vacation. She was laughing, smiling, enjoying herself. There were no signs that anything was wrong, no indication that she was worried or afraid or that something bad was about to happen. But there was one small cloud over the trip. On the last day, Jennifer and Rob had a minor disagreement. It wasn't a major fight, just the kind of small tension that can arise in any relationship, especially one strained by distance. Rob wanted to extend the trip. Jennifer wanted to get back to Orlando because she had work commitments. They talked about it. They didn't resolve it completely, but they agreed to discuss it later. It wasn't a breakup. It wasn't even really a serious argument, just a moment of friction. On Sunday, January 22, 2006, Jennifer and Rob flew back to Florida. But instead of driving the 3 hours back to Orlando that night, Jennifer stayed at Rob's place in Fort Lauderdale. They spent the night together, and early Monday morning, January 23rd, Jennifer left Fort Lauderdale and drove directly to work in Ocoee. She worked a full day on Monday. She was in constant communication with her family and with Rob throughout the day, texting and calling as she always did. That evening, she drove home to her condo at Mosaic at Millenia. She arrived home around 6 p.m. Monday evening, January 23, 2006. Jennifer was home in her condo. She had just finished a long day of work after coming back from vacation. She was tired, but in good spirits. She spoke to her parents on the phone while she was driving home from work around 6:15 p.m. She told them about her day, about work, about the trip. The conversation was normal, routine, unremarkable. Everything was fine. Later that evening, around 10 p.m., Jennifer called her boyfriend, Rob. They talked for a while, and during that conversation, they revisited the small disagreement they'd had at the end of the vacation. The long distance was hard. They both felt it. Rob was in Fort Lauderdale. Jennifer was in Orlando. They saw each other on weekends, but the 3-hour drive was exhausting, and maintaining emotional intimacy over the phone wasn't always easy. The conversation didn't end badly, but it didn't end perfectly either. There was some tension, some unresolved feelings, but they said goodnight, they said they loved each other, and they hung up. That was the last time Rob Allen ever spoke to Jennifer Kesse. That phone call at 10 p.m. on January 23, 2006, was the last confirmed contact Jennifer had with anyone who loved her. After that call, Jennifer presumably got ready for bed. She took a shower. Investigators would later find the shower still damp, a wet towel draped over the sink. She laid out clothes for work the next day. A selection of outfits was found on her bed, as if she had been deciding what to wear. She set her alarm, she went to sleep, and at some point the next morning, Tuesday, January 24th, she got up, got dressed, grabbed her purse, her cell phone, her keys, her briefcase, and left for work. She locked her door behind her, and she disappeared. Tuesday morning, January 24th, 2006. Jennifer Kesse's routine was predictable. She was disciplined, organized, always on time. Every morning she would text or call her boyfriend, Rob, to say good morning, to tell him she was heading to work, to stay connected even though they were 3 hours apart. That Tuesday morning, Rob waited for the usual text or call. It never came. He tried calling her. The call went straight to voicemail. That was unusual, but not immediately alarming. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe she had forgotten to charge it. Maybe she was running late and would call him back soon. But as the morning went on and he still hadn't heard from her, Rob started to feel uneasy. Meanwhile, at Central Florida Investments in Ocoee, Jennifer's colleagues were also starting to worry. Jennifer was never late. She never missed work without calling. And by mid-morning, when she still hadn't shown up and no one had heard from her,
Her employer did something that would prove to be critically important. They called her parents. Drew and Joyce Kesse received the call that their daughter hadn't shown up for work and wasn't answering her phone. They immediately knew something was wrong. This was not Jennifer. This was not like her at all. Within minutes, Drew and Joyce were in their car, making the 2-hour drive from their home in Tampa to Jennifer's condo in Orlando. Their son Logan joined them. The whole family was terrified, but they were trying to stay calm, trying to think rationally. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe she had gotten sick and overslept. Maybe her phone really had died and she just hadn't been able to call anyone. Maybe. But deep down, they knew something was very, very wrong. When Drew, Joyce, and Logan arrived at Jennifer's condo around noon on January 24th, they used the spare key Jennifer had given them and let themselves in. And what they found was both reassuring and deeply disturbing. The condo looked normal. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass, no blood, nothing to suggest that violence had occurred inside the apartment. The bed was unmade, but that was normal for someone who had just woken up. The shower was still damp, a wet towel hung on the rack, hair and makeup items were spread across the bathroom counter as if Jennifer had been getting ready for work. On the bed, several outfits were laid out as if she had been choosing what to wear. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Jennifer had gotten up that morning, taken a shower, started getting ready for work, and then left the apartment. She had locked the door behind her, and then something had happened. But what? And where? Drew and Joyce immediately called the Orlando Police Department. They reported their daughter missing, and that's when the investigation began. But it didn't begin as urgently as it should have. Because in 2006, when an adult went missing, especially an adult with no history of mental illness, no known enemies, no obvious red flags, police often assumed the person had left voluntarily. Maybe she had run away. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she would show up in a few days. The Kesse family knew that wasn't true. They knew Jennifer would never disappear without telling them, but convincing the police of that would take time. Time that Jennifer might not have.
The Orlando Police Department did initiate a search, but the urgency wasn't there in the first 48 hours. And in missing persons cases, those first 48 hours are everything. That's when the trail is hot. That's when witnesses remember details. That's when physical evidence is still intact. But because Jennifer was an adult, because there was no sign of forced entry or struggle, because her car was missing, which suggested she might have driven somewhere, the initial response was measured rather than aggressive. The Kesse family didn't wait. They immediately started searching on their own. They called everyone Jennifer knew. They called her friends, her co-workers, her ex-boyfriends, anyone who might know where she was or have seen her. They put up flyers. They contacted local media. They did everything they could to find their daughter. And then, 3 days after Jennifer disappeared, on January 26, 2006, came the first major break in the case. A resident at an apartment complex called Huntington on the Green, located about 1 mile from Jennifer's condo, called police to report that a black Chevrolet Malibu had been parked in the lot for several days. The license plate was run. It was Jennifer Kesse's car. Police immediately went to the location. They found the car parked in a visitor spot near the pool area. It was locked. There was no sign of damage, and when they opened it, they found that Jennifer's belongings, her purse, her wallet, her identification, her credit cards, her ATM card, were gone. But the car's expensive DVD player was still there, which ruled out robbery as a motive. The car had been wiped down. There were very few fingerprints, just one latent print that didn't match anyone in the system, and a small DNA sample that was too limited to be useful with the technology available in 2006. But investigators also found something else: security cameras. The parking lot at Huntington on the Green was monitored by security cameras, and when investigators reviewed the footage, they saw something that would become one of the most iconic and frustrating pieces of evidence in true crime history.
At approximately 12 noon on Tuesday, January 24, 2006, the same day Jennifer disappeared, a person drove Jennifer's black Chevy Malibu into the parking lot of Huntington on the Green, parked the car calmly in a visitor's spot, sat in the car for 32 seconds, and then got out and walked away. The person was wearing what appeared to be painter's clothes, or the kind of casual work attire that a construction or manual laborer might wear. White shirt, dark pants. The person was estimated to be between 5'3" and 5'5" tall, and that's all investigators could determine, because as the person walked away from the car and past the security camera, their face was obscured in every single frame. Not by poor image quality, not by pixelation, but by a wooden fence. The camera was positioned to capture the walkway, and there was a fence between the camera and the walkway with evenly spaced gaps between the posts. And as the person walked, their body was visible through the gaps, but their face was perfectly, impossibly hidden by the fence posts in every single frame. The camera was on a time-lapse setting, taking a photo every 3 seconds. In each photo, the person's face was blocked. Investigators tried everything to enhance the images. The Orlando Police Department brought in NASA, yes, NASA, to use advanced enhancement technology to try to see through the gaps, to get a clearer image to identify the person. But it didn't work. The angle was wrong, the timing was wrong, the fence posts were perfectly positioned to hide the person's face. To this day, no one knows if the person in the video is male or female. No one can identify them. They are a ghost, a phantom, the person who knows what happened to Jennifer Kesse, captured on camera, and yet completely anonymous.
With Jennifer's car found, but Jennifer still missing, investigators began working through the most likely scenarios. The first people they looked at were those closest to Jennifer. Her boyfriend, Rob Allen, was questioned extensively. He had an alibi. He was at work in Fort Lauderdale at the time Jennifer disappeared. His phone records, his coworkers, his timeline, everything checked out. He was cleared as a suspect. Her ex-boyfriend, who had recently expressed interest in getting back together with her, was also questioned. He too had an alibi and was eliminated. Her family was ruled out immediately. They had no motive and their anguish was clearly genuine. So investigators turned their attention to 2 other groups, Jennifer's coworkers and the construction workers at her condo complex. At Central Florida Investments, where Jennifer worked, investigators discovered that a manager had been pursuing a romantic relationship with her. Jennifer had turned him down because she had a policy of not dating people she worked with. The manager was questioned, his behavior was examined, but there was no evidence linking him to her disappearance, and he was eventually ruled out as a suspect. That left the construction workers, and this is where the case becomes even more frustrating. At the time Jennifer disappeared, Mosaic at Millennia was undergoing a major renovation, converting from apartments to condominiums. There were dozens of construction workers on site every day, and according to Jennifer's family and friends, Jennifer had expressed discomfort about some of these workers. She had told her mother that the workers would sometimes catcall her, whistle at her, stare at her in ways that made her uncomfortable. She told her boyfriend that she didn't feel entirely safe in the complex because there were so few other residents and so many workers around. She would call her parents and stay on the phone with them whenever workers entered her apartment to do repairs or maintenance, just so someone would know she wasn't alone with them. But when police tried to interview the construction workers, they hit a massive roadblock. Many of the workers were non-English speaking. Many were undocumented or working under temporary arrangements. And by the time police began seriously looking at them as potential suspects, many had already left the site, moved on to other jobs, or even left the country. Investigators were able to interview some of them, but the language barrier made it difficult, and without any physical evidence linking any specific worker to Jennifer's disappearance, there was nothing to hold them on.
And here's an even more disturbing detail that would emerge years later. According to residents of the complex, up to 10 construction workers were living in vacant condos at Mosaic at Millennia. They were essentially squatting in empty units, sleeping there, living there, with full access to the complex. One of those vacant condos was directly across the hall from Jennifer's unit, so there were men living 20 feet from Jennifer's front door who worked on the property, who had seen her coming and going, who knew her routine, who had access to master keys that could open any door in the complex, and police didn't even know this until years later. The window to interview these men, to track them down, to investigate them properly, had closed within days of Jennifer's disappearance. By the time investigators realized they should be focusing on the construction workers, it was too late. They were gone, and so was any chance of identifying which one of them might have taken Jennifer.
Police brought in bloodhounds to track Jennifer's scent. The dogs were given an item of Jennifer's clothing from her condo and were taken to the parking lot at Huntington-on-the-Green where her car had been found. The bloodhounds picked up a scent trail, and they followed it from the parked car, down the sidewalk, across the street, and all the way back to Mosaic at Millennia, all the way back to Jennifer's own apartment complex. This was significant. It suggested that whoever had driven Jennifer's car to Huntington-on-the-Green had then walked back to Mosaic at Millennia afterward, which meant one of two things. Either Jennifer herself had driven to Huntington-on-the-Green and walked back, which made no sense and was contradicted by the surveillance video showing someone else parking her car, or someone else had driven her car there and then walked back to Mosaic, possibly because that's where they lived or worked. This supported the theory that someone from Jennifer's own apartment complex was involved, someone who had access to her building, someone who knew she lived there, someone who, after abducting or killing her and disposing of her body, drove her car a mile away to create distance between the crime and the complex, and then simply walked home. Based on all the evidence, investigators developed a working theory of what had happened to Jennifer. On the morning of January 24th, Jennifer woke up, took a shower, got dressed for work, and left her condo. She locked her door behind her. She walked toward her car in the parking lot, and somewhere between her front door and her car, a distance of maybe 50 yards, someone grabbed her. Maybe they came up behind her. Maybe they ambushed her from a blind spot. Maybe they overpowered her before she could scream. There was no sign of a struggle in the parking lot, which suggests that whatever happened quickly. Jennifer was small, 5'3", about 115 pounds. If someone attacked her from behind, if they covered her mouth, if they moved fast, they could have subdued her in seconds. The attacker likely forced her into a vehicle, either her own car or another car, and drove away. At some point, Jennifer was killed or hidden somewhere. Her body was disposed of in a location that has never been found. And then, at noon that same day, the attacker drove Jennifer's car to Huntington-on-the-Green, parked it in a visible spot where it would eventually be found, and walked away. Why? Why park the car there? Why not drive it to a more remote location and hide it? The prevailing theory is that the attacker wanted the car to be found relatively quickly to throw off the investigation, to create confusion about where Jennifer had actually disappeared from. If the car was found a mile away from her condo, investigators might assume she had driven there herself, that she had left her complex on her own, that the crime had occurred somewhere else. And for a while, that strategy worked. It took investigators days to realize that the key to the case wasn't where the car was found, but where it had come from, and by then, the trail had gone cold. As months turned into years with no arrests, no significant breaks, and Jennifer still missing, the Kesse family became increasingly frustrated with the Orlando Police Department's handling of the case. They felt that the initial investigation had been too slow, that critical time had been wasted, that leads had been missed, that the construction workers should have been interviewed more aggressively and more quickly. In 2008, the FBI briefly took over the investigation, but they too were unable to make significant progress.
The case was handed back to the Orlando Police Department, where it sat, and sat, and sat. The Kesse family refused to give up. Drew and Joyce Kesse devoted their lives to finding their daughter. They kept her face on billboards, on buses, on websites. They did media interviews. They organized searches. They hired private investigators. They did everything they could. But they kept hitting the same wall. They couldn't access the full case files. The Orlando Police Department controlled all the evidence, all the reports, all the witness statements, and they weren't sharing everything with the family. So in 2018, 12 years after Jennifer disappeared, Drew and Joyce Kesse made an unprecedented decision. They sued the Orlando Police Department. They filed a lawsuit demanding access to Jennifer's case files under Florida's public records laws. The police fought back, arguing that releasing the files could compromise the investigation, but the Kesses persisted. They argued that the investigation had stalled, that new eyes on the case might generate new leads, that they had a right to know what had been done to find their daughter. And they won. In 2019, after a legal battle that cost the family over $80,000, the Orlando Police Department was ordered to release the case files to the Kesse family. 16,000 pages of documents, thousands of photos, hours of video and audio recordings, everything. And what the Kesses found when they reviewed those files was devastating. Leads that hadn't been followed up on, witnesses who hadn't been re-interviewed, construction workers who had never been properly tracked down, gaps in the investigation that never should have existed. The Kesses took those files and hired their own team of private investigators, and with fresh eyes on the evidence, new theories emerged, new potential suspects were identified, and the case, which had been cold for over a decade, started to heat up again. For nearly 20 years, the Kesse family waited. They never gave up hope, but as each year passed without answers, the possibility that Jennifer would ever be found seemed to grow dimmer. And then, in October 2025, something extraordinary happened. Drew Kesse, Jennifer's father, made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the true crime community. New DNA evidence had been found, evidence that had been collected years earlier but had never been properly tested. And with modern forensic techniques, that DNA was now being analyzed. More importantly, investigators had significantly narrowed the pool of suspects. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, there was real, tangible progress. The case was no longer cold, it was active again. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement was now heavily involved, bringing resources and expertise that the Orlando Police Department hadn't been able to provide. A documentary about Jennifer's case was being produced and was set to be released in 2026, which would bring even more national attention to the investigation. And most importantly, there was hope. Real, genuine hope that after 20 years, the person who took Jennifer might finally be identified, that justice might finally be served, that the Kesse family might finally get the answers they had been searching for since January 24, 2006. Drew Kesse told reporters that the suspect list had been narrowed significantly, that investigators were focusing on specific individuals, that the DNA evidence was critical. He said that the family believed they were closer than they had ever been to solving the case, and he urged anyone with information, anyone who had worked at Mosaic at Millennia in January 2006, anyone who knew a construction worker who left town suddenly, anyone who recognized the distinctive walk of the person in the surveillance video, to come forward. Because after 20 years, time is running out. Witnesses are aging, memories are fading. The people who know what happened to Jennifer are getting older, and some may die without ever revealing the truth. But there's still a chance, still hope, still time for justice. This is the question that haunts everyone who knows this case. Where is Jennifer? Her body has never been found, not in the woods, not in a lake, not buried on construction sites that have since been developed, nowhere. For 20 years, investigators and volunteers have searched. Hundreds of locations have been examined. Cadaver dogs have been deployed. Ground-penetrating radar has been used. Divers have searched bodies of water, and nothing. If someone killed Jennifer on the morning of January 24, 2006, they disposed of her body in a way that has kept it hidden for 2 decades. That's not easy to do. It requires planning, knowledge of the area, and either extreme luck or a very secure hiding place. Some theories suggest she may have been buried on a construction site, and her remains are now underneath a building or a parking lot that was built after her death. Some believe she may be in one of the many lakes or retention ponds around Orlando. Some think her body may have been transported far from Orlando and disposed of in a remote location. And there's one darker theory that her family has had to consider, that Jennifer was taken by human traffickers, that she was kidnapped not to be killed, but to be sold, that she's alive somewhere, held captive, possibly in another country. It's a theory that sounds like the plot of a movie, but it's not impossible. Florida, and Orlando specifically, has been identified as a hub for human trafficking. Young, attractive women have been targeted. Some have disappeared and never been found. Could Jennifer have been trafficked? Could she be alive somewhere, unable to escape, unable to contact her family? It's a theory that brings hope and horror in equal measure. The Kesse family has investigated this angle. They've followed leads to Mexico, to Central America, even to Russia. They've looked at connections to trafficking networks. They've pursued every possibility, no matter how remote. But so far, there's been no evidence to support the trafficking theory. And the more likely, more tragic explanation is that Jennifer was killed on the morning she disappeared, and her body was hidden somewhere it has never been found.
The person in the surveillance video is the key to this case. Everyone involved agrees on that. If that person can be identified, the case will be solved. But who is that person? Based on the evidence and the theories that have emerged over 20 years, investigators believe the suspect is likely someone who met the following criteria. They worked at or lived at Mosaic at Millennia in January 2006. They had access to the complex, knew the layout, knew Jennifer's routine. They were comfortable moving around the property without attracting attention. They were between 5'3" and 5'5" inches tall. They wore work clothes, suggesting they were a manual laborer or someone in a similar profession. They knew how to drive, knew the area well enough to navigate from Mosaic to Huntington on the Green, and were confident enough to park Jennifer's car in broad daylight and walk away. They likely had experience with violence or crime because they were able to subdue Jennifer quickly and quietly without attracting attention. And they disposed of her body in a way that has kept it hidden for 20 years. The leading theory has always been that the suspect was one of the construction workers at Mosaic at Millennia. And with the new DNA evidence announced in October 2025, it's possible that investigators have finally identified which one. But until an arrest is made, until charges are filed, until someone is held accountable, the figure behind the fence remains a mystery, a ghost. The person who knows exactly what happened to Jennifer Kesse and has kept that secret for 20 years. While Jennifer Kesse has never been found, her impact is undeniable. On May 2, 2008, the Florida House of Representatives unanimously passed Senate Bill 502, known as the Jennifer Kesse and Tiffany Sessions Missing Persons Act. The law improved how missing persons cases are handled in Florida. It mandated better training for law enforcement, required more timely responses, and created better protocols for investigating disappearances. The Kesse family's advocacy also led to changes in how the Orlando Police Department handles high-profile missing persons cases. The lawsuit they filed and won set a precedent for families' rights to access case information. And the attention they've brought to Jennifer's case has kept it in the public eye for 2 decades, ensuring that it was never forgotten, never relegated to a dusty file cabinet.
Jennifer's story has been featured on national television shows, podcasts, news specials, and documentaries. Millions of people know her face, know her story, know that she's still missing and that her family is still searching. And that attention, that pressure, that refusal to let the case go cold may finally be paying off.
If you're watching this video, if you've stayed with Jennifer's story all the way to this point, then you're part of keeping her case alive. You're part of the community of people who believe that every victim matters, that every family deserves answers, that justice delayed is not justice denied if we keep fighting for it. And maybe, just maybe, you're the person who can help solve this case. Did you work at Mosaic at Millennium in January 2006? Did you know someone who worked there? Did you know a construction worker, a maintenance worker, a contractor who worked on that property? Did someone you know suddenly leave Orlando, leave Florida, leave the country around that time? Do you recognize the walk in the surveillance video, that distinctive gait, that confident stride? Have you heard someone confess? Have you heard someone brag? Have you heard someone let something slip after too many drinks? If you know anything at all, now is the time to speak. The case is active again. The suspect list is narrow. The DNA evidence is being processed. An arrest may be imminent. But it will only happen if people who know something finally come forward. You can remain anonymous. You can call the tip line. You can do the right thing. Jennifer Joyce Kesse was 24 years old when she disappeared. She would be 45 years old today. She should be here. She should have gotten married, had children, built a career, celebrated holidays with her family. She should have grown old. Instead, she exists only in photographs, in memories, in the hearts of people who loved her and will never stop searching for her. But there's still hope. After 20 years, there's still hope. New evidence, new leads, new momentum, and a family that has never given up. Jennifer Kesse deserves to be found. She deserves to come home. She deserves justice. And you can help make that happen.